right, good people. Welcome back to the Truth Prescription, another episode. Today I'm having the pleasure of talking to Miss Teru Clavel. Teru is a comparative international education speaker. She's been interviewed on CNN, Fareed Zakaria's show, The Today Show, CBS This Morning, CNBC Squawk Box, among others. And she's a mom of three. Hey, Teru.
Nice to see you. Thanks, Dr. G.
Her book, World Class, chronicles her journey halfway around the world through Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, to understand education systems and, most importantly, the best way for her to educate her children. And out of all this, she figured out really what's a good way for children to learn. So I'm happy to have her as also a parent of three to come on the show and talk to the people, not only about her truth, but about, how we can better teach these, as my grandmother said, children.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
So let's jump right in, Teru, to the Truth Prescription. Are you ready?
I think so. We'll see.
Think so? We'll see. Okay. So for my new listeners, or for my old listeners, you know what the show's about. For my new listeners, the Truth Prescription really dives into the truth. I mean, the fundamental fact is, unfortunately, we're afraid of the truth. Why are we afraid of the truth? Because it's uncomfortable. Nobody likes it. It scares us. It's uncomfortable. Blah, blah, blah. What we try to do here on the show is show that although the truth can be scary, you can still be courageous and move through it. Because once you're stuck and not accepting a particular truth, you're not going to be able to move forward. So, Teru, you want to do personal, professional first?
Whichever your listeners may want to hear first. Both can be scary, so.
Okay, let's do scary, but you're going to be courageous. You're going to put on your courageous hat today, and we're going to move through this.
Okay.
Because you got it. First of all, anybody that can publishing a book in itself requires a supreme amount of being courageous in the face of fear. So I know you got it in you.
Oh, thanks.
All right. So let's do personal. Let's start with personal. People like the personal.
Okay.
People like to get to know you. So tell us a story, Teru, about a situation in your life, you don't have to tell your age, but from when you were born to all the way now, that in your personal life that maybe it was a truth that you were either ignoring or that you were unaware of, that once you figured it out, you were able to break through in a certain way.
So on my way here,
Okay.
I considered what I may say.
Okay.
And this is a big thing for me to come out and say in public because I haven't. So I don't know if I've actually broken through in terms of what I've learned, what's on the other side. But so I'm going to take a step back, and this may be both professional and personal. But my book is about how in 2006 I took my two kids at the time with my husband to Hong Kong, and I was there for 4 years, and then my third child was born in 2009. And then we were in Shanghai for 2 years from 2010 until 12. And then we're in Tokyo from 2012 until 16. And then came back to the US, but not back to New York, our hometown. And we were in California for 2 years and then finally moved back.
In Palo Alto, right?
Yeah, we were in Palo Alto. And then moved back to New York City the summer of 2018. And something that happened along this journey, and especially towards the end, that wasn't a part of the book, because frankly, I sold World Class on a book proposal and got a deal with Simon & Schuster imprint Atria in the summer of 2017. And I had 1 year to write the book. So I had to submit the manuscript at the end of the summer of 2018. Yeah. And then had a year before it was published, because it just came out recently. And what happened along that journey, literally as I was finishing up my manuscript, was that my husband and I filed for divorce.
Wow.
And it's really a difficult thing to kind of get my head around, because my book is about how I raised my family. And then at the end, kind of, what am I going to do? How am I going to share this story? And not that actually he is I don't want to undermine or anything about his role as a parent, but he's not really a huge part of of my book World Class.
Right.
He was traveling, I would say, up to 5 out of 7 nights a week anyway, while we were overseas.
Right. You were mostly involved with the education of the children.
I was 100%.
Yeah. Right.
And along the way, I did start working and I went back to school in 2011. But I've never really talked about that out loud. So
well, that was big.
That is a big thing. And I am presently, hopefully, towards the tail end of my divorce.
Process,
but it's like the backstory of my book that isn't in the book, because I really wanted to focus more on education and the comparative international education angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a hard truth when the relationship doesn't work out.
Right? Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody would ever. I got married in my 20s, and you believe in every romantic ideology out there that you're going to end up, maybe not necessarily a picket fence, but some kind of a cliche like that.
Yeah.
And you want to have your kids and you want to be living happily ever after. So when that falls apart, it's a whole new kind of rebirth.
Yeah.
And rediscovery.
Well, so for me, I'm in my second marriage now, right? So for me, when I got divorced, I realized that I had this thing in my head where my role was to take care of people, and my needs weren't that important. So that was the truth that I came to out of the relationship, and having to change that in order to choose someone from a different place. That I have my thing, you have your thing. We come together, we make a better thing. Being very simplistic. Is there something you can say that you learned about Teru? In that led to the ending of the relationship. Obviously, listen, I don't know who filed, but everybody has a part to play, right? It takes two to tango, as
Absolutely.
they say, right? So even if you were completely innocent, the fact that you would even get into a relationship with someone that could eventually end means that there was maybe something that you could learn. So is there any truth that you think you found out about Teru? And if it's not, then it's not, because it's still ongoing. I mean, my divorce took forever. It took 4 years. I mean, from beginning to end.
Wow, that does not give me a lot of hope, but thank you for sharing for everybody who's listening.
You're going to learn a lot of patience if it happens. That's what it taught me. I mean, I had no patience before that. And so going through that process taught me a ton of patience. And so, there's always gold at the end, but when you're going through it, it's like, this is a pain in the ass.
No, there are times that are excruciatingly painful.
Yeah.
Especially when you have children involved.
Absolutely.
That all said, and I'm still learning. I'm still figuring out my truth, I guess.
Yeah. We'll say the truth.
The truth.
Because there is no your truth or my truth.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, the truth. There's only one truth, right? The sun comes up, it goes down. That's it. So there's, our perspective on things is different, but I think the truth is the truth. Jeff's got on a gray T-shirt. That's the truth, right? We have to look at things very, and so I'll say this. As a scientist, and I'm a physician, so as an applied scientist, some of it's easy, some of it's hard, right? Because when you're scientific as you are, you can disconnect the heart and the brain a lot of times, right? Where it's helpful, where the brain is helpful, is that you can look at a situation as it is, black and white. Those are the facts, period. Now, when you talk about being in touch with your feelings and connecting the two, that's a whole nother conversation. I've talked about that in other podcasts. But my point is, you have a lot of power being someone who's very analytical. Because you can look at once you get the emotion out of it when you need to, you can look at situations very, very starkly. This is what it is, period. End of story. Yeah. And that can help you in the end. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, it's interesting what you mentioned about being objective about your decisions and looking back in 2020 hindsight. I am more, I'm towards the tail end of it, I hope, but I would say it's really, I was maybe too idealistic in my 20s. Okay. And I was raised by a single mom for the most part. And now that I am a parent of 3, I look at the way I was raised and how I don't want to repeat history, how I was so kind of ignorant about how to be maybe invested or smart in my marriage, or what knowledge I didn't have
Yeah.
prior to getting into a relationship. And I'm so kind of keenly aware of that I talk to my kids all the time about. I was even talking earlier to Grace about, I think I had 3 conversations with my mother ever about sex, and they were
Interesting.
one-line comments, and she's very Asian kind of in her values in some ways.
Yeah.
And that is very different when you're growing up in a very capitalistic Western, and I would say more selfish American culture.
Sure.
And I took many classes. I have a master's. I'm second way through my second master's, where I'm half Asian, and I was always told, well, you're the model minority. You follow the rules and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, but I still had a different kind of an experience.
Yeah.
And so growing up where I feel like I was the only one in my grade who spoke a different language at home than English. And then wanting to have this sense of acceptance in like I'm sorry to say, like the kind of white male privileged society.
Sure.
Really formed my decisions. And I look back on that and I think it's such a shame in so many ways. And so I mean, I don't know if I was to say what is the truth, I don't know. I wish I were just smarter. I mean, 2020 hindsight, I wanted to see what I wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really scary. It's really
Yeah.
easy to put your blinders on and have rose-colored glasses. But I mean, talking about the truth, it's really important to deal with what you don't want to deal with. That's probably more important than anything else, really.
Yeah. And speaking about education, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Just speaking about education, there are 2 things that I always get aggravated why no one taught me when I was in even elementary school, right? Dealing with the truth or really self-observation, being objective with yourself, and then money management. Those 2 things are just not taught at all. And they're so critical to things that we do every day. So, to your point, it's something that we're not really, given information about.
Well, I would say when they talk about some of the reasons marriages fall apart, they say money and children, right? 2 huge stresses.
Right.
And I don't think I ever knew what the realities were and how hard marriage is. And I would say compounding my situation was I was suddenly, I'm an Ivy League educated woman.
Yeah.
And I did have a career before we went to Hong Kong. And I gave all of that up. And it was fine because at the time I thought, okay, I'm going to focus on my children. But then when you go overseas and you don't necessarily have a work visa and your identity becomes trailing spouse and you're somebody's wife.
Yeah.
And for a while it's kind of, okay, you're living in the, in this luxurious lifestyle as an expatriate. But then you kind of think, okay, well, who am I? Aren't I more than this? And so,
perfect.
And that's really hard. So by the time we were in Shanghai in 2010, I decided I needed to change who I was. And I went back to school and I started working. But then what ends up happening is you have another change in your relationship, in your dynamic.
Of course.
So, my husband was thinking, okay, so I am a trailing spouse. I'm at home. I'm taking care of the kids. And when you want something bigger, it's like when I change, everybody around you has to change. And that may not work for everybody,
right.
And so as it's very difficult. So I think I just wish I had the knowledge, and I don't talk about that in World Class, but in 2006, when I hopped on this plane to go to Hong Kong with 2 kids in diapers, no one said, do you know what that means? What happens to your identity? How long are you going to be away for? Yeah. And I was so willing to accept the adventure without kind of thinking about
you.
Yeah. or any of the consequences, good and bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's good. I think
Is it okay?
I think we can stop there. I feel, well, I'm going to say this one thing to you, that don't feel ashamed. I've had at least, this is my 65th episode or something like that. I've had at least 20 people tell me that they've talked about stuff on here they've never said anywhere.
I'm not surprised. Do you get people crying?
I've had one. I've had one tear up. So I know it's it's an emotional thing. I don't want to, push you too far, but I think the point you're making is very important for the listeners to hear, that you need to be really in touch with your identity. Who are you? And when you go into situations, try to base your decisions on that. And sometimes you can get caught up in, really what you're talking about is the fantasy. you get caught up in the fantasy instead of the reality, you can end up in a situation that may not be best for you. Now, I'm always an optimist, right? Because out of all this, right?
Yeah.
Bam, right? World class, right? If you didn't go on this journey with your children, there would be no world class. It may have been something else, but it wouldn't have been a world class. So it still worked out. But I think the net of it is, it sounded like you were growing in a particular way that was in opposition to maybe the thoughts or the fantasies or whatever that your husband had. And as you grew in that way, he couldn't sort of accept the truth of that. And that's where the conflict started. And
I would agree with that. And it's hard to, if maybe you can have me back on next year. And if according to your 4-year plan, it would have to be 2.5 years from now. But since, there's only so much I can and can't talk about right now because we are still in the midst of the divorce.
Sure.
But I would like to add, I'm gonna make a little plug here. On Friday night,
yes,
being a single woman now, which I haven't been in a long time. I got married in 2003. I just went online. I'm like, I'm going to go see a show tonight. And it was Friday night and I didn't have my kids, which is a really new thing for me, right? Because I always had my kids with me. Sure. And so I bought tickets. There was 2 tickets left in the whole theater for this play. Have you seen it or heard of it, called Slave Play?
I haven't.
Phenomenal. This is my plug. They didn't pay me, but it was, I literally left the theater dizzy with emotion, completely dizzy. I felt like I was in a film in Times Square where the whole sky and cityscape was swirling around me. And it's about our history of oppression in this country and how we are still dealing with it within our own context, within our own parents and grandparents, and how it's embedded in our hundreds of years of history. And gaining acceptance and the roles we play and our identities in that. And I don't think there's a person who sat in that theater who didn't figure out, who wasn't challenged by, so where are you on this spectrum of the oppressed and the oppressor? Yeah. And you have to have a point of view. And all I could think about was, wow, that really is interesting in terms of having grown up the way I did in a culturally Japanese home in the United States, who the majority was, who makes the societal rules, who's sitting on the bench, what's going on politically. And what's my role in all of this, both in my personal decisions and within the larger community and society. So I highly recommend it.
Okay. Slave Play.
Slave Play. I mean, it's one of those things where it's almost intriguing because it has like basically an NC-17 rating. So before you check out, it says, all this content, adult, nudity, sexuality, all this stuff. Oh. Yeah. So, I mean, it's even more like, ooh, I'm doing something naughty on my own, but it's fantastic if you have a tolerance for that. Maybe the first, maybe the entire thing. I was going to say maybe just only the first 20 minutes. No, but it's pretty in your face in a very intentional and powerful way.
Do you feel like when you go to things and you're affected by it, sometimes you're affected for like the moment, right? But clearly you're still affected because you're talking about it. Do you think it's going to change the way you do anything? Yes. Okay. And that's big.
Powerful.
That's huge.
That's up there with the top 5 any kind of artistic works that it's huge. And I think anybody who leaves that theater would have the same kind of impression. And it changes the way. It was just brilliantly done. They had 4 interracial relationships and 2 gay relationships, and different ages, and in the way they wove it all together with the history and it was very, very smart. Very smart.
Whoever wrote and directed Slave Play, if you're listening, you did a great job. I think all creatives, even me as a film, I've done a couple films. You want that, you want to have if you're making it for the right reason, you want to have a piece of art that affects people that in a real way,
No question.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
You ready to jump into some questions?
Here we go.
Okay. I think I'll start with something light.
We could do that too. Yes.
How do you think, because you started, you had this HGTV show you were the host of, right, of an interior design show. This is years ago, but
a long time ago.
A long time ago. I know. Can you compare and think about how interior design is similar to parenting, specifically like educating, your children?
Well, I can think of a really top level thing right away. Something that drove me crazy about interior design was the way you make money in it. And at the time, it was commission based, right? So the only way to really make money as an interior designer is to do mass market stuff like IKEA, or at the time, it was Crate and Barrel, or just, stuff you buy it kind of cheaply. It's kind of disposable furniture on the IKEA end. And online kind of purchasing was at that level in terms of furniture was just kind of starting. So it wasn't really a huge market yet. Or the other way to make money is to be really high end and you take commissions. And I was doing more high end stuff. I would have loved to be on more the IKEA end of things. But, it drove me crazy. It really upset me that you had to basically say, you know what, you can buy that sofa at IKEA for $300, but the only way I can make money is for you to spend
500.
Oh, five? No. Try like 15,000. With the customization, the right size, the fabric, the trim, it was just like, and it kind of gave me the creeps, because I think that's so wasteful. It was such an extravagance. It was just like basically throwing money away. So it felt like this. It is the luxury kind of interior design. At the high end.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
So when I think about education, it's something that keeps me up at night is how in this country, in the United States, it's not an even playing field. If you have money and you can live in a high tax district, you can send your kids to a top-notch public school for the most part, right? And you have enough money for private school tuition, which is anywhere on the low end in the 20,000s per year, and on the high end, 50. Sometimes 60, depending on where you are with all the.
And these are for little people. We're not talking about high school. Yeah.
I mean, even in New York City, when you talk about pre-K levels, I mean, they're barely in school, right? And you're talking tens of thousands of dollars a year. And so I feel like in that sense, you have this, it shouldn't be a luxury. Interior design, fine. Maybe at the high end, it can be a luxury item. But in the US for education, it should be free for everybody because it is a public good. The fewer highly educated people we have, the worse it is for this country. And when I think about our higher education system, it to me is literally a crime that many of our top universities charge $60,000+ a year for tuition. And you're setting it up so that only the elites can go. I mean, people say, oh, the middle class can afford it. That's not true.
Right.
Our middle class is dwindling, and so, and you think about those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the chances of them even getting to a private institution like that, I mean, the gap is just increasing so much. And in other countries, because my area is comparative international education, the top universities in most countries are not only free, they are public.
Right.
So there's accountability and transparency at the levels of who they admit, how they admit them, right? Whereas there are plenty of lawsuits now against Ivy League universities now because they want the transparency. How did you decide these Asian Americans couldn't get in, for example?
Right.
But they're private institutions.
They can do what they want.
But then they do have federal, tax breaks. So it's a very fine line. They can operate however they want with legacy admissions, with contributions, so how fair is it? It's just, so that's the first thing that comes to mind in terms of interior design
the unfair playing field.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was, as I did use an interior designer. I use one now and I used one before. And I remember I was just talking to her randomly and I was like, why does my pillow cost that much? She was like, listen, this is cheap. She's like, I just did a client's pillow yesterday. It was $10,000. I said, for a pillow? She said, yeah, for a pillow. So these things can get really, ridiculous.
I mean, you can spend literally thousands of dollars per yard on fabric that's custom made in Venice. It's like, but why?
Yeah.
I couldn't wrap my head around it. For some people, it's great, but that is a pure luxury, though, and education should not be.
It shouldn't be. No, that's a great point. My other question, my next question was really, you answered a lot of it, but I'll let you go into further detail, which is really talking about why do you think education in the U.S. is flawed, and sort of what are the Asian countries in particular doing better that people here maybe can implement?
So the equity issue is definitely one. In Japan, there was an article published pretty recently. It may have been in the Atlantic. I'm sorry if I am misquoting the source, but it said maybe this is as equitable as education can get, talking about the Japanese system. And these strong teachers, if there's any kind of a struggling school or struggling classroom, the strongest teachers are put into those classrooms. And it's considered a part of the important professional development and an honor for that teacher because they can handle it.
Okay.
There are senior teachers that mentor the junior teachers always, without question. They're not just thrown into a classroom. In China, if there are schools that aren't doing as well, they are partnered with thriving schools, and or even the thriving school will take over the management of that lesser school. And then when we talk about funding too, it's equitable. So for instance, it's not equal, meaning, okay, we'll give $40 per student to educate them in this place and then 40 in another place, because the cost of living is different.
Yeah.
And then their home resources are very different as well, right? There's a whole social reproduction theory whereby if you are educated parents and have the means, right, it's much easier or it's just kind of natural for your children to be that much more educated and to have a leg up. But if you come from a family that may not be as educated or not have the funds, then society has to make up that difference. So maybe they need $100 more per pupil spending than the family that comes from a more advantageous background. So
they actually make some adjustments for that.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
Okay.
the countries that have equitable funding, our country for the most part has a 45-45-10. It's on average funding model. So 45% typically comes from local taxes, 45% from the state, and then 10% from the federal government. And in the United States, the Department of Education was an afterthought, right? Because it was states' rights. So if you're not going to collect the tax dollars at the local level, your state government is responsible for equitably subsidizing that district's education spending per pupil, and that has to be addressed in this country. The fact that it's not is, and we worry about the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And someone asked me recently, the whole Varsity Blues scandal where celebrities were found basically paying their kids' ways into colleges, and someone said, "Oh, isn't that great? Now it's gonna level the playing field." And I said, "Are you kidding? It's just gonna go deeper underground."
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, it's just
So just get smarter at not getting caught.
absolutely much more so.
This has probably been going on for a long time.
Oh, it's been
anyway.
going on. It really surprised me that it took this long for it to come out. And something else that I would definitely say that we should be doing, and this is also at the state level, is our teachers. We don't spend enough to recruit the best and the brightest and to retain them and to invest in their professional development. I don't fault a teacher at all by saying they don't work as hard. I've heard this all the time. They don't work as hard. Recently, I did an interview with a very conservative radio host, and he said they're underworked, overpaid, and basically lazy. And you can't you can't say that, right? Because we have the system whereby they're underpaid, they're not trained, right, and we're not recruiting the top students who do become engineers or maybe lawyers or doctors. And in other countries, it's very, very hard to become a teacher because the requirements are so high. And in Japan, in 2014, for 38,000 spaces, there were over 200,000 applicants. And the teachers had to do everything from sight sing and sight read, keyboard, swim every kind of a lap in the pool, in elementary school, be able to teach any kind of a subject, twirl on the bars, and then they have to get re-credentialed every 5 to 10 years. And it's a really, really hard examination. And it goes over pedagogy and child development. And it's another amazing thing that they do in Japan, which I was floored by, and I talk about this in World Class, which is the elementary school teachers basically are not allowed to teach the same grade level more than 2 years in a row. So for their professional development, elementary school goes from grades 1 through 6. And they know what's going on. The second grade teacher knows what's going on in sixth and third because they're always switching the grade, right? So they know where the kids are coming from and where they're going. And not only that, when you talk about equity within the school district, these teachers are not allowed to stay, unless they're very geographically isolated schools. These teachers aren't allowed to stay in the same school for more than 2 or 3 years. So you make sure there's no good school and no bad school.
Got it. The talent gets moved around.
Yeah, and it's also good for their professional development because they don't just stay in the same classroom for 10, 15, 20 years, right, which is a very common US model.
Sure.
Right?
Wow. Yeah, my oldest daughter is 15. She's in high school, and I was talking to her yesterday. She was like, "Oh, my teacher's so terrible. He just sits up there and he just reads to us. He doesn't really answer the questions that I have." And I was like, Nia, you need, because both my parents are teachers. So I said, Nia, you got to remember this guy has a curriculum he's got to get through. And so it may seem, boring, but he's got a job to do. And basically his job says you got to get through this information in this amount of time. And if you don't get through it, then he's behind. So I just encourage her to go to his office hours and, ask questions outside of class. But I mean, I feel the pain of teachers having, grown up with 2 teachers, and it's not easy, but some of the things you're talking about are like amazing. And you wonder if you saw this, firsthand, how come we're not, taking some of these tools and using them here? It makes you wonder, do we really want to improve the system? Or is it just laziness? I don't know the answer.
On a more top level conversation, I would say something that really struck me is all the technology that was in our classrooms when we got back to California, to the US. And I thought maybe this is because we're in the middle of Silicon Valley, that every kid has an iPad or in the classroom, right? Or a computer, some kind of a laptop, Chromebook, which Google was touting. It's only $200 per pupil kind of a thing. And then you have Apple classrooms and Apple teachers, and the kids have smartphones from, you go to a restaurant, 18-month-olds are put in front of their iPhones, right? And
I heard you say in an interview your kids don't have smartphones. I was so happy with that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying. I'm going to try to do that. I hope my wife lets me.
I mean, because think about the default, right? For me, it's go read your book.
Right.
You shouldn't be bored. And nothing is more couch potato-like or couch potato inducing than giving your kid an iPhone. You just sit there as horrible. A passive, and how much of it actually sticks in your brain?
Yeah, it's just a time waster.
It is. So when we went back to California, though, and I saw all this technology in the classrooms, it's like, who's behind all this, right? And I understand the classrooms and the teachers may feel underfunded or unsupported. So when they're given gadgets, gizmos, apps, they're like, oh, this is great. This is going to solve for this problem I have in my classroom. But then you really look at it, and you look at Apple and Google and Amazon and all these corporate interests that come into the classrooms. And I really feel like technology disintermediates the relationship between the teacher and the student. Because, back when I was in school, and I would guess that we're around the same age, if you showed your work in math, oh, okay, I'm older than you. Just by a few years.
Okay.
But
you don't, can't see. So good. Oh, it's good. You're doing something right.
And, when you look at that, when you look at kids' math, when we did math, you saw maybe she's not carrying over when she's doing math, she's not carrying over the number to add. Maybe she's, the variable's incorrect. Or you actually physically saw the work. Whereas now, if you're doing math on a computer, you're not seeing that. And the answers are multiple. You don't know what the problem really is. And kids don't know how to write. They're not learning basic grammar. They're all of these things. And you can't appreciate Shakespeare if you haven't studied the foundations of our English language, and that creates a whole host of other issues, which, discipline, perseverance, patience, and social emotional learning. It's much easier to bully someone online. We don't have to look at them face to face.
Right. Yes.
Right.
The bully move. Right.
Right.
Coward move. Yeah.
And so when I look at the issues, I look at the corporate interest, and something that I'm blown away by. And I don't know if anybody else has done this. I may have odd curiosities, right? Because I'm into education. But I did spend time in a lot of the schools across the country in the 2017-18 academic year. And I spent time in Miami-Dade, which is the country's 4th largest school district. And this isn't unique to Miami-Dade, but if you go to their website, they have a whole page on lobbyists. And you can see what lobby groups have come in to the district because by law they have to make this public. And Apple, the most recent, I think it was in there 3, 4, 5 times this past academic year. And that's kind of a scary thing because you don't have that in the countries where it was in Asia, in the cities. And then when you think about the corporate interests too, it's in their best interest to make money, right? And to sell textbooks. So to come up with the latest and greatest curricular innovation. And so school districts have to buy, they feel like they have to buy new textbooks every few years. And I was in some classrooms, and I talk about this in World Class, where I went to an underfunded school district in California, East Palo Alto. And at the end of the class, the teacher said, for all of you who don't have smartphones, come at the end of class and get books. I was like, what?
That's horrible.
So the kids are reading on their smartphones. And I said, why doesn't everybody just get a textbook? And he said, because we can't afford it.
Wow.
And I mean, on so many levels, right? That's kind of screwed up.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
One of the other things you talk about, which, and this is actually my wife's question, which when we were talking about you this morning.
Thank you.
One of the other things that you talk about is how in Asia, the children are really engaged to be independent at an early age, right? 5, 6, 7, going, taking themselves to school, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And her question was, although we believe that and we try to engender that in our children as well, do you think that type of independence is more difficult here because, it's just not as safe? Other countries are more safe. There's more of a reverence for children and women. What do you think about that idea that over here we need to kind of keep them a little bit more close to the vest just because of it being dangerous?
So I grapple with that question all the time because when we were in Asia, we left when my youngest was 6, and 6 is pretty much the age in Japan where kids are left to travel to and from school, to their after school activities on their own. Yeah. And that includes a 1 hour plus, maybe for some kids, commute to school, which includes public transportation and multiple, from walking to bus to train to walking. Yes. It's 6 years old, right? Yes. And then when we came back to the US though, I was like, okay, so do I pull in the reins and not let them have the independence that they're used to? And I think there's so many things going on. And like you mentioned, in Japan, there's such a reverence for these children and so much protection. And people, for the most part, follow the rules, right? Nobody's cutting, not nobody, but you don't cut the line.
Yeah. Child abduction.
You don't, stuff. Yeah. And certainly there are few, if any, guns. And there's very little theft. Right. You can drop literally a wallet in the street with $1,000 and it will find its way back to you with everything intact. So, when you think about the kids walking around on their own, they're for the most part very, very safe. And the first graders even have a special yellow flap on the back of their backpacks to show they're first graders. And so we have to be extra careful for them. And it's not just the adults in the community, it's the other students who know, we're going to take care of the first graders, like the second graders. Everybody will take care of the first graders. And in this country, I feel like people would say, you're putting a target on the most vulnerable person's back. Why would you tell anybody they're only, 6th grade or 6 years old and in first grade? And I think what we can do in this country, I think we go to extremes to protect our children. And I think in my life, nothing is hurt more than parenting. Right? I mean, when your child is hurt, you try not to show them necessarily, but it kills you inside. Of course. And when they go off to do something and they may not succeed or it really hurts. But I think we hold on to them too closely in this country. And I was having this conversation with a good friend of mine, and she was talking about her son just went to a summer program and he's in middle school. And she said, I'm so sad. He's eating alone tonight. He's by himself. He has no one to talk to, and I don't know what to do. And I just said, well, how long has he been there? And she goes, tonight's his first night. And I thought, well, back in the day, our parents wouldn't have known that because we would have had no way to communicate, right? So we kind of just dealt with it. And we've all had plenty of times, I think most of us who've sat alone somewhere, felt lonely, but it builds up a resiliency that kids today are criticized for not having, the millennial generation, but it's also the way we parent them. And we're in constant communication with them for the most part because they have smartphones or on social media. They're communicating with each other, right? But the irony is that this generation is more lonely than
more disconnected.
Even though they are apparently connected.
Right.
So, right. So I would say give them more freedom and more latitude, even if it may feel so painful for you, because something that I talk about, and oftentimes parents look at me like I have 20 heads, but I say, whose interest is being met when you give them a smartphone? Is it for you? Because I often hear they're safer that way.
Yes.
But if they're walking,
you have a regular phone.
Yeah, exactly. A flip phone. My kids have flip phones. My oldest is 15.
If it's about communication, it's a flip phone.
Just get a flip phone.
Yeah.
So is it meeting your interest or their interest? Because it may be in the child's interest to have more freedom and to make mistakes. My son said to me, my middle son, I think he said it last year. He said, it's so much better in Japan when kids aren't watched over all the time. And I said, why? He said, because not only do you make more mistakes and learn from your mistakes, he said, but you make better friendships. And I thought about that. And
that's the 15-year-old?
At the time, he said this when he was 12.
12, okay. Wow.
And I thought it was interesting, right? Because there's so much kind of hovering. And I have not met a parent who has not been regretful of having given their child an iPhone too early. Yeah. Right? Every parent says, wait as long as you can, wait as long as you can. Yeah. I went to a middle school talk at my daughter's school. And in her school, middle school starts in 4th grade. It's very early. Okay. And she said, wait as long as possible to give your kids iPhones. And I think it took her a lot of courage to say that, because there were plenty of parents in that room who've given their kids iPhones from the time they were in 1st grade.
No. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's too much.
So I do feel like there is a middle ground. And with that whole independence thing, it can start with being a part of your community and rolling up your sleeves. Yeah. I was told recently, why is it that in our kids' generation, when they create a Christmas list, do we have to give them everything on the list? And I thought, yeah, that's kind of interesting, because I only got one gift, and it's kind of this generation where they lead the charge, but we're kind of letting them too. Yeah. So I think parents just have to be stricter and have higher expectations of these kids within the household as well. Give them chores, and not for money, but because it's their duty. It's the right thing to do. Yeah. And, and sometimes, and I digress just a little bit, but this kind of stuff drives me nuts. It's like when I go to the gym and the corridors are very narrow and people leave their locker doors open and you can't walk by if they haven't closed them. And I'm always the weirdo, I'm like closing everybody's locker door. Right. And I'm thinking, who raised them? Who raised them? Who raised them? What, do they think it's normal? Like, right.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
It's their world.
Or when you go to the movie theater and people leave popcorn and buckets and napkins and soda and straw wrappers all over. It's like, just because you paid $10 for a ticket, does that entitle you to leave a total mess for the people who were...
This is my world.
It's and
nobody else lives in it.
But if we don't, as parents, teach our kids these values, how do you let them go into the world as independent, contributing members of society? And in Japan, that's done so beautifully from preschool.
I read a stat that said that the intelligence of a child is directly related to the parent that is like basically with them the most.
Absolutely.
And it's a side note, but it's basically what you're saying. That we really need to pour into these children the values that we want to see.
And that's something that I think about all the time, the values. When you go into a Japanese classroom, it's not rare to see their signs and posters on how to hold a pencil. And this isn't, but here it's like, I can hold a pencil however I want. If I want to hold it like this, or I want to hold it, on the back or whatever, you can do it. And they're, this is how you sit, with your 2 feet down on the floor, sitting up straight. At the beginning of class, you bow to the teacher. At the end of class, you say thank you, and you bow every single period. Yeah. Oftentimes when you ask a question or you're called upon, you literally stand up, push your chair in, and then respond, because you're showing respect. Yeah. And these are values, but in our U.S., and this is the excuse that I hear, and I don't even want to call it an excuse. It's just kind of the accepted practice, where we say we're such a multicultural country that we can't teach values, because the values of one household,
that's nonsense.
It's not right, because respect is respect.
Yeah, it's nonsense. It's
complete
nonsense.
But sometimes, and teachers are fearful, and I can understand this. Some parents will get very angry about, well, you're infringing upon my child's freedoms by telling them what to believe or not to believe. And yeah, okay. I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah.
But that often happens. And then you have teachers who definitely feel overwhelmed by the teaching responsibilities that they have.
Right.
So
they're just trying to get through the curriculum.
They're just trying to get through it.
Teach values.
Exactly. But then, when you think about their teacher credentialing process, I have yet to see any teacher, and it's done by state, any school of education that requires knowing fully about child development, values, morals, how to teach that, and how to even interact with parents, which is a vital, the homeschool partnership is so important. And I've yet to see a college of education teach that.
Yeah.
And in Japan and in China, it's part of the curriculum to become a teacher.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to jump ship a little bit.
Yes.
I have a lot of creatives who listen to the show.
Awesome.
And so how would you mentor the writers out there about the process of getting a book proposal done, submitted, and then ultimately getting published?
That is a very good question, and one that's just going to be probably a stream of consciousness.
Stream on.
I had the idea to write World Class, and it had a very different, not so good working title previously that I'm not even going to mention.
World Class is a great title.
It's a good title.
It's got like 4 or 5.
Happy. Yeah, different meanings. But I went back to school for my master's in comparative and international education in 2011. And then in 2013, I started doing education journalism. Okay. And that was the same time that I had the idea to write a book. And it was really based on this whole idea of Eat, Pray, Love, if you can remember that book. And it was, oh my gosh, I have that story because it's Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo. I have the same story arc.
Right.
But my first stab at it was really bad. It was just pure sing-songy memoir. And I'm not really like a wax nostalgic kind of a person. And I thought, oh my God, if something happens to me and I get hit by a car, God forbid, and this is what, I don't want this to be published.
Sure.
So I dropped that. And then another one became very academic. And I thought, this is so boring. I would never read it. And then only when I got back to the US in 2016 with my 3 kids to say, okay, now I have a book I can write. And I was pretty, I don't know what the word is, maybe overly confident at the time, thinking, okay, so I'm in my 40s. I'm not going to write a manuscript and sell it. I'm going to do this off a book proposal,
right? Because
I frankly don't have time. And I'm not going to have my heart broken like that. And that's the normal course for most first-time authors, right? I worked on my book proposal and I think in academic years, from the 2016 to 17 academic year. And I went back to school for my second master's at the same time.
Did you work on it with a consultant or you just worked on it by yourself?
I did have a consultant because I had no idea what a book proposal was. And I'm also really, really picky with every word. So I needed to make sure there was a balance of my being overly finicky with making sure I checked all the right boxes for writing a book proposal, because a book proposal is, in essence, a business plan,
right?
But for a book. So then I was very fortunate that I sent the book proposal out to 10 agents in 3 verticals: memoir, parenting, and narrative nonfiction. And I had my own rules for myself. I said, I'm only going to pitch the top in each category. I only want to work with a woman because my book, I felt like a woman is going to get it because it's about my journey as a mom.
Got it.
And in the summer of, I want to say 2014, I went to a writers conference in New York City in August. I happened to have been in New York visiting family, and I went, and there was this thing called a pitch slam. And it's basically speed dating. I think I had 3 minutes to be in a room. I think there were about 50 or 60 agents, and there's a bell, in the middle, and you're supposed to pitch for 90 seconds. They respond to you in 90 seconds, and then you move on. Bell rings. Okay. And everybody's told, don't you dare come in here, because it's mostly first-time wannabe authors. Don't come in here without a finished manuscript. I did not have a finished manuscript, but I thought, I'm in New York. I'm never here. I'm living in Tokyo. I'm just going to go in. And there was one agent that I really wanted to meet and work with because I liked her ideas. And so fast forward, 3 years later, she's the agent I ultimately signed with.
Nice. Nice.
And I don't think that happens. And she actually says, of all the conferences she's ever been to, I'm the only person she's ever signed off a conference.
Huh.
Yeah. So I was very lucky in that respect. And then I was lucky that my book proposal went to auction. And so in that regard, it was too easy. And so then I had a year to write, like I mentioned earlier, I had a year to write the manuscript. And then a year before it came out, and it just came out. And I would say,
did you really quick, did you have a schedule for yourself in that year?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I'm going to do a certain amount of pages a day. I'm going to do this, that kind of thing.
It's a haunting process.
Oh, I know.
Because, there were months where like nothing good came out. Nothing. I have whiteboard after whiteboard of frameworks of stories that don't make sense. Why is this story haunting me? What's the purpose of it? Do I include it? The amount of stuff left on the cutting room floor, the research I had to do, because it was 50% research, getting the right people involved, because a lot of the research was in Chinese and in Japanese, and I couldn't do it all. So finding the right researcher in Japan, or who, excuse my tummy, I guess I'm hungry, the right people who could do the Japanese and Chinese research was also challenging, and making sure I got the strongest research, and then traveling the country and meeting people to make sure I had firsthand knowledge of the people who were in the field. And it was horrible. It was it was a really, really tough, and I love editing because in my journalism work, I liked writing. I loved editing, which is, I understand, rare too. So I figured when the editing process finally came, I'd be great. And that was brutal. Even the editing was brutal, because there I am, tearing apart my own work. And it's not like you have so much time. I had a year to write this thing. When I was writing articles, I had like 24 hours done. Even if I had a week, there was a deadline. And once you submitted it, that was it. And people don't really, my work does get cited by academic research, but it's kind of like, this book is going to be on the shelf for a while, I hope. In my articles, I don't know who's going to go back and really read them. Yeah. It's just a very different mentality. So I always thought, okay, so, all these famous Thoreau, or all these people, they sat at their desks. They wrote, I don't know about Thoreau, I kind of threw that out there, but they sit at they wake up, they have their coffee, and they sit at their desk from 9 to 5, and then they do that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so not like that. I was like, am I allowed to be writing in bed? I'd have these like conversations with myself, or, is it okay that I'm in a coffee shop? Or, and then you get hung up on the ridiculous stuff, like, these headphones aren't strong enough, so I can't write today. It's like that. Nobody cares about that. Like, if you can write, you can write. There's so many excuses that you make for yourself.
But you got it done.
I did.
So the answer is, you didn't really have a schedule. You just pushed forward.
I did, but I will say, my manuscript was due end of August 2018, and I called my agent. I believe it was the very end of July. And I said, this is horrible. My manuscript is, shit. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't do it. I'm just going to take the penalty. I'm not going to have a book. And she goes, you're right on schedule. All my authors say about a month. Actually, you're 2 weeks late. Most authors have the freak out right about now. So don't worry about it. And that kind of made me feel better. I'm like, okay, I'm not a total lunatic. But there were many times, and I still say this, I understand why Van Gogh cut off his ear. Like, it's such a lonely process. Yeah. And so I made myself to, every day I would go out. It didn't matter what I did. And I'd force myself to meet someone at least once a day, so I wouldn't go totally stir crazy.
Right.
It's really hard. And the thing that I wasn't prepared for is how hard it is after your book comes out.
Hard in terms of what? The
publicity,
feedback, or just doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah. And how many books make the New York Times bestseller list? Not many. Yeah. And so the day my book came out, I felt like a pine cone fell in the middle of the winter in a forest, and nobody knows. It's just like another pine cone. And so your life doesn't change overnight. No. And it's a long slog, and it's kind of, it just starts. Yeah. When your book is published. And considering like the 2-year lead up to even get it published, and to think that's just when it starts. Yeah. Maybe thank God I didn't know, because maybe I wouldn't have done it, but it's it's a long slog.
Are you familiar with Hal Elrod?
No.
He wrote a book called Miracle Mornings. But just to give you some context, his book, it was out 18 months before he actually, like, now he's sold millions and millions of copies. He's done about 15 offshoot books from that.
Wow.
He's very well off from his publishing career. But to your point, he had to figure out a strategy.
Yeah.
Once it came out and that pine cone dropped and, nobody, looked around. It is tough.
It's really hard.
It is tough. So for the people listening, just know that, it's a process, but if you're committed to it and you feel passionate about what you're writing about, it's going to happen eventually. All right.
Yeah.
Are you ready to get into Yes or BS?
Yes, let's try it. I've never done this. It's like these interviews where I was like, I want to be the person answering these questions. Okay, good. Yes.
All right. This one we talked about a little bit, but let's see what you have to say. Number 1, a child should be independent by age 6.
There's no like in between answer, is there?
You can say yes or BS. You can say yes, just BS.
Yes or what? What can I say? Yes.
Like Jeannie, when I interviewed Jeannie, she was like yes, BS-ish.
Oh, okay. Yes-ish.
Okay.
Yes-ish.
Yes-ish. Okay. Kind of
Yes-ish.
like blackish. Yes-ish.
Yes-ish. I like yes-ish. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to expand on that, or you want?
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. I get to expand. That's great.
Yes.
I wasn't sure I was allowed to.
You are.
This is great. I've always wanted to be on a game show too, so this works out really well for me. Let's see. Ish, because I think there should be expectations for independence at 6, but you can't expect the child to be, independent and working and able to afford, healthcare.
Paying income
at 6.
tax.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But give them work. Definitely give them work.
And challenge them. I like you. One of your interviews, you were talking about how much pressure we put on our children in sports, but we don't put that same pressure on them in the process of learning.
Yes.
And with rigor. It makes me think about, my daughter, she's really good at math now, but when she was like 6 or 7, she hated me because I would just really hard on her. She showed me an answer. I'm like, well, how'd you get to that answer? She just kind of looked at me. All right, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Let me know, figure it out. And she hated it. She would cry. I wouldn't let her get up, but I needed her to explain to me step by step so that I knew she really understood the material. She wasn't just memorizing something.
I love
and that was
story.
with everything. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so now she's like, getting 95s and I'm getting, my average in math is 106, Daddy. I'm like, yeah, no.
So you wonder about that, right? Like 106, that means there's, 20, there's literally 16 points of A's there, right? I mean, it's.
Well, there's a couple bonus questions that she got right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
she's messing up the curve. Anyway, number 2. And this is just, struggle is a necessary part of learning.
Yes. No question.
I don't think we need to go into that. Number 3, you'll like this one. An educated person knows tons of facts.
Yes.
Good. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. You want to go into that?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I think it's also associated with smarts. I think you could be a super smart person and not know all your facts.
Nothing. Yeah.
And there's so many people who fit that, right? I mean, there are plenty of people who are super educated and super smart, but street smarts, I think, is a phenomenal skill, which is all about resiliency, patience, metacognitive understanding, intuition, unleashing all of those. And it's great if you know a lot.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of people who know the encyclopedia, or I don't know, these days, what do you call it? Wikipedia? I don't know.
Wikipedia.
If you know everything inside and out, but they may not be able to kind of make it in the real world.
I literally just had this conversation with Nia. I was like, there used to be this thing called encyclopedias that we would have to buy and
I love that. Let's bring back encyclopedias, don't you think? Before kids get smartphones, everybody, this is an opportunity for encyclopedia. I think they went bankrupt though. Don't quote me.
They don't. I mean, I'm sure I could find one if I needed to.
Maybe we should start that movement.
But they don't. Yeah, maybe.
I think it's a good idea.
They used to come to the house like door to door.
Yes.
Like that's what my mom was telling me. They used to come to the door, and every 3 or 4 years they buy a new set. It's like
Yeah, and remember National Geographic? Everybody wanted to keep their collection of National Geographics, the Wall of Yellow.
Yes.
We should,
think about that.
bring all this stuff back. Yeah.
And just to piggyback really quick, I always say that any fool can memorize any, facts. I mean, that's anybody can do that.
Well, see, so I'll expound on that just a little bit. So the idea of mastery, according to the OECD, is not just knowing stuff. It's what you do with that knowledge that's the most important. And that's what's so important to me.
Yeah. Application is everything. The solution is usually pretty easy, but it's the application that's the challenge. Yeah, it's the challenge.
For sure.
Number 4, cell phones are a great educational tool for teens.
BS. 100% BS. Yeah. I think, and I just talked to someone about this morning. So can I expand on this?
Yes, okay. Everyone you can expand.
People talk about, technology, and a man during a radio interview I had this morning said to me, that the host said, kids in Asia, they must be so advanced and they have so much technology because, or something to this effect, because they come to this country and they have STEM and all this other stuff. And I'm like, they actually in the classrooms, they have zero technology. Yeah. And they have smartphones or computer access after school, but they're getting the fundamentals so right. Yeah. And writing, nothing sticks in your brain more than actually using a pencil and writing it, repeating it, writing it, and that process, right? So, yeah, you can be the next Albert Einstein and probably never touch technology before 18. Yeah, I believe that completely.
Yeah. Agreed. Number 5, publishing a book is easier than parenting.
Yes. Yeah. Nothing is harder than parenting.
Exactly.
Nothing is harder. Although they liken the two. They say having a baby or writing a book is like having a baby.
Number 6, women make better CEOs than men.
I don't want to make a statement like that, but I would say yes-ish. After going through this whole process of having 3 kids in 5 cities and multiple countries and juggling priorities and always putting your kids' priorities over your own. Yeah. I think most women who've gone through what I've gone through would make phenomenal CEOs because you just know how to prioritize and balance so well. And it's a shame. This I don't like, how they say women know, let's say if they know 100% of the content, they'll go into an interview and say they know under 100%, like 40 or 50%. They're much more humble. And then men will not know 100%. And they'll say, I know 200% of everything you're talking about. You know what I mean? So, that has to be addressed. Yeah. But
that's a societal thing.
That very much is the expectations. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like a lot of women could say, okay, take over the world.
I've asked this yes or BS question a couple of times in different interviews. Women are smarter than men, and everybody always says yes. I don't know if there's a difference in the intellect, but I definitely know that there's a difference in the, I'll call it just the non-intellectual, the emotion, the heart, just the intuition. There's definitely a difference in the intuitive abilities to see things that are not right in front of you, in front of them, and that to me, has a lot of value. So even like when I hire my editors for my films, I always hire a female editor because I just felt like looking at the work product, like they always came up with something very different and much more than I could even see, and much more creative just in their approach to editing, cutting the footage together. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 7. Oh, I answered this one already, so I'll just repeat it. The intelligence of a child has direct correlation to the person raising them. Yes. This has been studied, but it's an important point.
It's a really important point.
It's a really important point. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, Teru, that's all I've got. Unless you have something else to say to the people, well, first of all, tell the people how they can reach you, where they can purchase the book from, how they can learn more about what you're doing. Yeah.
So my website, teruclavel.com. Okay. And you can find my book, World Class, on Amazon. And I love having these conversations and these discussions about education, about parenting. I have to bring up my social media,
Bring it up.
LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Okay.
But the book is 50% memoir, 50% research.
Yeah.
And I try to be as real as possible about my misconceptions, having put my kids into the local schools of Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Tokyo, and kind of how that unraveled and how it showed me a new way to see education.
Okay.
So if anybody reads my book or is a little nervous about reading it, let's say, it's not that I say they do it better, because I went in thinking, this is crazy. Like, why is my kid staying after class because he didn't get a 95 on a quiz?
Yeah.
Or, why does my kid have to take a rag to school every day to clean the school building? And it's about, and it's about how all of that kind of came undone, my preconceived notions, and how I came to see, actually, wow, there's a better way. And look at the outcomes. These kids are independent. They are higher achievers academically. They have values. They're ambitious. They're resilient. They're disciplined. And it really became much clearer to me when I came back to the US and didn't see those things happening.
Yeah.
So it is a journey. It's my journey. But I think that any reader would, and there's a lot of humor in there too. I definitely poke fun at myself. But I think a reader will go on that journey too, and maybe leave the judgment behind, which is something I definitely had going in, even though I wanted to think of myself as much more open-minded.
Yeah.
So yes, if you want to continue the conversation, definitely pick up a book. I recorded the audio too. So for all of
the
you,
audio book. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So,
how long did that take you?
Oh, that's a good question. So for an 8+ hour audiobook, which I thought was so long, and I'm somewhat humble, I don't know, but I was like, oh my God, someone has to listen to me for almost 9 hours. I don't want to listen to myself. But for that long a recording, I was in the studio for 30 hours.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And you have to sit silent,
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
like, whoa. I mean, so when my tummy rumbled earlier, I'd apologize to you, because when that happened when I was recording, do it again. Anytime, like if you put a pencil, if you breathe the wrong way, at one point I did this. I lifted my arms up to stretch while I was reading, and they said, excuse me, Teru, you have to do the whole thing again. I was like, it was just my arms, but it changed the acoustics in the room.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, Teru Clavel, thank you so much for coming on the Truth Prescription. I think the listeners got a lot today.
You're awesome, Dr. G.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll sign off as I always do. The truth will set you free.
I like that.